Welcome to the Animal Training Academy podcast show. I'm your host, Ryan Carledge, and I'm passionate about helping you master your animal training skills using the most positive and least intrusive approaches. Here at ATA, we understand that navigating the vast challenges you encounter in training requires a comprehensive base of knowledge and experience. It's common to face obstacles and rough patches on your journey that can leave you feeling overwhelmed and stressed. Therefore, since 2015, we've been on a mission to empower animal training geeks worldwide. We've aided thousands in developing their skills, expanding their knowledge, boosting their confidence, and maximizing their positive impact on all the animal and human learners they work with. We are excited to do the same for you. Simply visit www.atamember.com, join our vibrant community, and geek out with us. And of course, in the meantime, enjoy this free podcast episode as we explore new ways to help you supercharge your training skills, grow your knowledge, and build your confidence, so that you can craft a life that positively impacts every learner you encounter. But we will start today's episode where we'll be talking to one Dr. Keira Moore. Dr. Moore is a behavior analyst and dog trainer in the San Diego, California area in the US. She earned her PhD in behavior analysis in 2015 from Western New England University. She's a board certified behavior analyst at the doctoral level and a KPA CTP certified dog trainer. She has been working in various capacities in the field of behavior analysis for over 2 decades. Currently, she runs 2 businesses: Pet Project Dog Training, where she specializes in working with reactivity and separation anxiety, and More Behavior Consulting, where she works with humans with sleep problems, anxiety, and severe challenging behavior. Keira believes in compassionate and ethical dog training, making sure both the dogs and their humans' needs are met. She focuses on teaching good communication skills on both ends of the leash and is committed to ensuring happy and healthy relationships between dogs and their owners. So without further ado, it's my very great pleasure to welcome Keira to the show today, who's patiently waiting by. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and hang out with us at Animal Training Academy.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, our mutual friend, Francesca Espinoza, kindly suggested that you would be a great guest, and she's one of those individuals. And if you, the listener, don't know who we're talking about, you can find episodes with Dr. Francesca Espinoza in our podcast catalog. You're probably having to go back a couple of months to find those, but highly recommend listening to those. But she's one of those persons, people, Keira, who, if she suggests someone, I don't really question it. I just know.
Yes, she's a very smart lady. You have to trust her.
I just know they're going to be amazing. So, and she was recommended to me by Ava Bertelson. And again, I just went, I don't have to question or look at this person and do my due diligence because Ava's done it for me. I love the connectedness of how we came to be sitting here together recording this podcast episode today.
It's a surprisingly small world, even though I've never met her in person. We've only interacted online, but yeah, we're spanning circling the globe here with the connections.
Yeah, well, we were lucky enough to hang out in London last year, but I've got amazing friends around the globe just like that who I've known for a decade or so and have never met. So yeah, it is pretty amazing. But gratitude for all of the introductions. If you, the listener, want to introduce someone to me, feel free to reach out. I always enjoy meeting new people. But let's dive straight into your story here. I love hearing about people's behavior odysseys, as I like to call them. And you've got a very interesting one, and you've got some great experience in various areas, including animal training and behavior across human learners as well. and you've got some great knowledge and academic background. So I can't wait to learn about where you started and how you got to where you are today. Can you take us back?
Yeah, so I have I think a bit of a unique journey that brought me to where I am right now. And and I think most of the time that I've been on any podcast or done any interview, we've ended up spending almost all the time talking about my weird past and all of the odd things that I've done that have led me to where I am now. I always knew I wanted to work with animals from the time that I was a young kid, and I begged and begged and begged my mom to let me get a dog from the time that I could speak. And of course, like a lot of other people, didn't get one. Didn't have, my mom wouldn't cave and wouldn't let me have any dogs. I ended up finally getting a hamster. She relented and let me do that. But I knew I wanted to work with animals from the time I was young, but I didn't know what kind of options were out there. I thought veterinarian was the only thing you could do where you worked with animals, and I knew pretty early on when I went to college that that wasn't the career that I wanted, that I didn't really want to get into medicine. And I got lucky. I always say my whole career and kind of journey in life has just been one lucky chance thing that happened after another. But I suppose that's how we all end up where we end up. In my undergraduate program, I was majoring in psychology, and I went to Hamilton College out in the middle of nowhere, central New York, which happens to also be the college of B.F. Skinner, which a lot of people don't know, but that's where B.F. Skinner went as an undergrad. And as such, my psychology department was teaching some behavioral psychology classes, and they had a rat lab class, which was, I think, probably still to this day one of my favorite classes that I've ever taken. So we got to work with rats in Skinner boxes, and I was not very good at it. The very first thing, of course, that you do if you're working with a rat in a Skinner box is teach them to press a lever. And it took me and my rat Ralphie a solid week of sessions to get him pressing the lever because I didn't understand what I was doing. But I was so interested in learning more about it. And I think up until that point, I had kind of like, I knew I wanted to be in psychology, but the classes I was taking on cognitive psychology and abnormal psychology and counseling psychology just weren't quite speaking to me. They didn't quite match with my worldview or what I thought I knew about behavior. But that class really grabbed my attention, and I said, I love this. I want to do more of this. And my college had an internship program with the New England Center for Children, which is out in Boston, and that's a school for children with autism. And you could go and spend a semester there and work with children on the autism spectrum. And I wanted to do a semester abroad, but I couldn't afford a semester abroad. And I had never traveled internationally. And so I thought, oh, this is my chance to do a semester away, not quite abroad, but off campus for a semester, do something a little bit different. And I didn't know anything about autism, had no idea what I was getting into. I just thought, oh, Boston will be fun. I'll get off campus for a semester. And that kind of started me on my journey into behavior analysis. So I went out there and I learned all about ABA. I got to work with kids on the autism spectrum, and I got to take courses in a master's program in behavior analysis. So that's kind of where it all started. While I was there at the New England Center for Children, another kind of stroke of luck, I took a class with a woman named Karen Gould, who happened to be a good friend of Karen Pryor. And Karen Pryor had recently been working at the New England Center for Children, doing some consultation with them. And one of the books that we read in that master's class that I was in was Don't Shoot the Dog. And that was my introduction to behavior analysis, was reading that book. and getting so excited, going, oh my gosh, this is the psychology that I've been looking for. This is what makes sense to me. And this is what I want to be doing. And you could do it with animals. And reading that book, I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with that book. Karen does such a great job of explaining this works just the same way on humans and animals. So I thought, oh, I'm going to come back here. I'm going to get my master's in behavior analysis, and then maybe I'll work with animals. But I didn't realize that's not quite how that works. I wasn't quite in the right field. So I ended up going back there and getting my master's in behavior analysis, and then my PhD in behavior analysis as well. And working with kids on the autism spectrum all during that time, but always still having this kind of smoldering thought of, I like this. I like this career I'm in, but boy, do I really want to be working with animals. And I know that all of this stuff that I've learned applies to animals. I'm just not sure how I get there. How do I make that jump into that field? And so that's kind of where the whole journey started. While I was in grad school, I started dabbling in clicker training after I had read Don't Shoot the Dog. I had a bunny at the time who I started doing some clicker training with. And then a year or two later, I had a roommate that took in a feral kitten. And I was not really a cat person. Sorry to anybody who is. I'm more of a dog person. But I had said to her, we can't keep this cat. This cat is a kitten that was just food obsessed, had never lived in a home before. As I'm sure you all know, cats can open doors, they can climb on stuff, they can get in trash cans. This cat was destroying our house because he was just after food all the time. And I said, you have to get rid of him. We cannot keep this cat. And then I woke up one weekend and the cat was attacking me, trying to steal my breakfast. And I had a thought of, but wait a minute, I know how to do some clicker training. I wonder if I can use a little clicker training here. And I started shaping just 4 feet on the floor initially. The cat had 4 feet on the floor. I'd drop him a little piece of my breakfast. And then that turned into shaping him to move away from me. And within a couple of minutes, I had this little kitten sitting at my feet and backing up all the way across the kitchen floor until he would hit the wall on the other side of the kitchen. And then I'd toss him a piece of food. And then we'd do it again. And I'm thinking, like, I taught him this funny trick, but also this is great because now he's not climbing all over me trying to steal my food. And my roommate came home later that day and I said, we have to keep this cat. We have to keep him. I'm going to teach him tricks. And sure enough, I did. He was our little circus cat that did a bunch of silly circus tricks, and he played a piano. And that was my intro into clicker training. That was a lot. There's so much more too.
Yeah, we'll just keep sharing. I mean, I can prompt you with some questions, but
yeah, you stop me if you have any questions, or if I'm making it difficult to follow, because my story, this is where the story I think gets a little bit weird. Yeah. So I finished my PhD in behavior analysis, and at that time was quite burnt out. I was working in a residential program for kids on the autism spectrum with kids with very severe behavior challenges. And I had been doing that for, 8 years at that point while being in school full time. So very challenging job, and then taking classes at night and just burning the candle at both ends. And when I finally finished, I knew my heart was in behavior analysis, but I also felt so incredibly burnt out on what I was doing. And I had, in the middle of my doctoral program, I had discovered flying trapeze, which, if any listeners don't know what that is, it's the thing you see in the circus where they're up in the air swinging on a bar and flying through the air, and another person catches them up over the net. I had discovered a school in Boston that taught flying trapeze, and they were running a Groupon deal. And I bought one and I went to a class, fell in love with it, and started devoting more and more time to doing that, and eventually ended up becoming a flying trapeze instructor. And so when I got really burnt out with my job, I sat down with my boss and I said, I need to take a break. I need to take either a couple months off, or I'm probably going to quit because I'm really at a breaking point here. And I was again incredibly lucky. This was another kind of pivotal moment where I just happened to get really lucky. And my boss said, "Take a couple months off. We'll give you a sabbatical and we'll hold the job open for you, but take 3 months off, go do your trapeze thing, do what you got to do, and then come back refreshed. We'd rather keep you on and have you be wanting to be here than watch you walk away right now." So I took some time off, started doing flying trapeze full time, and then realized that's what I wanted to be doing, that I was happier than I had been in a very long time. It was nice to not have the stress of work and school. And I decided not to go back to my job, and I decided to move out to Seattle, Washington, and start teaching and performing flying trapeze full time. And so I kind of literally ran away and joined the circus when I got burnt out with my job. As you can imagine, my family was thrilled about that. I got a PhD and promptly quit and joined the circus. And I spent a few years traveling all over the world. Didn't get to New Zealand. I got close. I got to Australia, but not didn't quite make it all the way out to you. Traveled all over the world teaching and performing, and then ended up here in Southern California just before the COVID pandemic started, and came here in what was supposed to be a temporary stint teaching at a flying trapeze school here, and became more permanent than we anticipated because of the pandemic. And during that time, I realized trapeze was not really a sustainable life choice for me, but I knew I still wanted to be in behavior analysis, but that I wanted to take a different path than what I'd been doing before. So with all that extra pandemic time that we all had, that's kind of where I carved out my next steps, and I started a business consulting on sleep problems, which is something that I had learned how to do during my doctoral program, and I had been doing it sort of as a kind of side hustle for a while. And I said, you know what, I really enjoy this work. I'd like to be doing that and focusing on that more. And I started teaching in some online master's programs in behavior analysis, and then eventually got a dog, finally, my first dog. And she was a complete and utter disaster. And I say that in the most loving way. But she was a rescue that came with a ton of behavior problems, and that ended up, I think, like probably a lot of other dog trainers out there, that was the real impetus into me becoming a dog trainer, was that I had to learn how to do it with my own dog, and kind of took a deep dive, and again got super lucky and got connected with a lot of really great people in the industry, and people who are really brilliant dog trainers that taught me everything that I know. And I decided a couple of years ago that I wanted to be doing that professionally in addition to all the other things that I was doing, because I like being really busy. And so I went to the Karen Pryor Academy and I got my certification through them. And then I just started my own dog training business a little over a year ago now. That's my long journey.
Yeah, well, what a journey. I mean, it would make sense. How did you and Francesca meet? Because she's also a
Mm.
behavior analyst who's doing dog training.
Yeah, we have a ton of mutual contacts through the academia world and through behavior analysis. I actually don't know how we first got connected. I think she had written a blog about her dog that I found somehow. I'm not even sure how I found it. And I sent her a message being like, hey, I'm also a behavior analyst with a really weird dog that I'm trying to figure out, and we should talk more about this. And then we ended up in a short-lived reading group together with a couple of other people who were interested in behavior analysis and animal training. But I don't know how we actually first met, if it was through that group or just through me seeing her blog. But yeah, we have very similar backgrounds. Her work, I think, has been, hopefully I'm characterizing this right, but she's been mostly focused on skill acquisition in behavior analysis and teaching, and what are the best methods of teaching new skills, where my work and my experience has been more focused on dealing with extreme challenging behavior. So I think our areas of work and our areas of knowledge and expertise complement each other well. And so I will often talk to her about dog training things, and we both come at it from a similar understanding of behavior analysis, but slightly different experiences in what we've specialized in.
Yeah, I guess it must be rare to, and I can appreciate the, and tell me if it's the wrong word, excitement when you found someone who you could geek out to on the level that
Yes.
like your
Yeah,
knowledge and academic background allows you to, and also
exactly.
talk about
Yeah.
dog training.
Yep. I am always on the hunt for more of those people. When you have a shared language and shared terminology and understanding, it makes it easy to have those conversations and to go deep down rabbit holes of things that you're interested in.
And going back, hold that thought. Going back, my mother, I feel your pain. My mother did not allow me to have a dog either, and I was allowed a mouse. We had mice that had to live in our garage, so I get that. Also want
Mhm.
to just spend a tiny little brief moment just acknowledging and expressing gratitude for Karen Pryor and the work she's done. And yeah, don't shoot the dog being such a pivotal part. I think it would be the most mentioned piece of content, I think, if you were to listen to the entire ATA podcast library,
Mhm.
the amount of
Mhm.
times that the combination of don't shoot the dog and a complete mess of a dog, I think you described your dog as, or something
Yes.
along those lines,
Yep.
um, being such important components of people's journeys. I'm curious, a couple of years ago, as a community within our membership, we uh, all did, not all, but those who wanted to participate and could had the resources to at the time, did Susan Friedman's LLA together, and then we had these group panel discussions at the end exclusively for our members. And it only really dawned on me then, and that was a couple of years ago, that ABA and my understanding of it, which is very different than yours, and much
Mhm.
less knowledgeable. I do not have the academic background that you do, but my knowledge of it, I only just realized a couple of years ago when we were doing this panel discussion that it's more than just like dog training or animal training. It's kind of, philosophy is the wrong word, but it's just how you see life. It becomes like all encompassing. It's
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah. I don't think philosophy is the wrong word, because I actually talk about that a lot with my students, that radical behaviorism is the philosophy that underlies the science of behavior analysis. And I think something that I push a lot with my graduate students who are in an ABA program and largely working with kids on the autism spectrum. One thing that I really try to push with them is you have to understand the philosophy that underlies this science that we do, because if you do understand that, everything that you're going to do becomes so much easier, because you can apply that philosophy or that kind of basis that underlies the science to anything. And I think that's what's allowed me to move with relative ease into dog training from a background in human work. And I always try to be careful when I'm comparing the two and comparing the work I've done with humans and the work that I'm doing now with dogs, that I'm not comparing humans to dogs or dogs to humans, because they're different. But learning and behavior is all the same, regardless of species. It all works the same, and what we know about behavior applies to all behavior. It doesn't matter if it's dog behavior or human behavior or cat behavior or fish behavior. Those principles work the same for everyone, just like physics works the same on everyone. Even if you're a dog or a human, if you jump out of a tree, you're going to fall. It works the same. So I don't think that's the wrong word, and I think that that's a really, really important thing for people to understand. And one thing that I also have been trying to talk to more dog trainers about, that you can be great at what you do without understanding it, without understanding the philosophy of radical behaviorism, or without understanding the science. You can be a great practitioner. But I always think, for anybody, if you really understand what is behind what you're doing, you're always going to be better. And you're always going to be able to solve new problems, even if you don't already have the tools in your toolbox, because you do, if you understand the science. And so I think that's what's helped me a lot in making that transition, is that if you understand the science, you can apply it anywhere. And even bigger than that, I think, like what you were saying, the philosophy of radical behaviorism, it is like glasses that you can't take off once you understand that. Once you're thinking like a behavior analyst, you can't not think like a behavior analyst, unless you're talking about your significant other. For some reason, for me, the glasses come off. If I'm trying to analyze my significant other's behavior, I can't think about it like a behavior analyst. It just it's the analysis goes out the window then. But yeah, it's you kind of can't take that off.
Yeah, I was going to say that you can't take them off, and I was going to say that I feel sorry for our partners because they're like, stop talking about reinforcement. What I was going to say was, so it's special connection when you find someone who shares your academic background and has worked across earthling species, dogs, humans, cats, goldfish. And I actually, before I asked what I was about to ask, I realized that the listeners of this show are at a huge, significant variety of places in their careers, just getting started. Some of our listeners been training longer than I've been alive. Some of them have done LLA or have done some university courses and understand applied behavior analysis. Some of them are going, what are these people talking about? Talking about applied behavior analysis. So, but I think for everyone, just if someone said to me, hey, can you describe radical behaviorism? Like, I would have to stop and think, articulate it, and then question myself whether and then be like, I need to get to a computer or get my phone out and like double check that what I'm missing. So can you just, for everyone listening, when we talk about radical behaviorism, define that for us?
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah, it is a hard one to give a precise definition for, because it is I think philosophy is probably the best word. And radical behaviorism is a type of behaviorism that was popularized by B.F. Skinner. I was going to say founded by, but that doesn't seem quite like the right word, because there were some people that had talked about similar things prior to Skinner. But I think Skinner's the one that best articulated it. Before B.F. Skinner, there was behaviorism, but it was a very different kind of behaviorism. And Skinner called his radical behaviorism to differentiate. This is radically different than the other behaviorisms of our time. Prior to Skinner, most behaviorism was very focused just on observable behavior. So we only look at what we can see and what we can measure. Skinner, what makes Skinner's radical behaviorism different is Skinner said that's an artificial way to categorize behavior, to say it only counts if we can see it or if we can measure it. Because there are things that you and I know are behavior that we can't see and we can't operationalize. Like if I turn off all the lights in this room right now and I wave my hands around, no one can see that. It's still behavior. It's exactly the same as if I do it with the lights on. It's just that the lights are off now, so that doesn't suddenly make it not behavior. If I say the words out loud, the dog is brown, versus if I whisper those words so that only I can hear it, it's still behavior. It's still the same behavior. It's just changed in intensity. And then if I whisper it under my breath, or if I think it in my head, it's still behavior. It's still the same. And so that's what makes radical behaviorism radical, or radically different than other behaviorism, is that Skinner said that just because you can't see it or you can't observe it doesn't make it not behavior. And he talked about the skin being an artificial boundary, that behavior can occur inside of the skin, just like it occurs outside of the skin. And that even in those cases where we can't see it or we can't measure it, we still have to assume that it is subject to the same laws and it works the same way as behavior that we can see. So thinking is behavior, feeling is behavior, and we should expect that those behaviors work the same way as behavior that we can see, like speaking out loud, or behavior that we can observe. So that's not a great short definition of radical behaviorism, but that's what radical behaviorism is, or what makes it different than other behaviorisms. And I think a lot of people have lost that, or don't understand that, or don't know that. Especially, I find this a lot in my graduate students, because they learn early on that when we're measuring behavior, or when we're changing behavior, we have to be able to observe it. We have to have inter-observer agreement. We have to operationalize it. And so then they start thinking that as behavior analysts, we can only deal with behavior that we can see, or we can observe, or we can operationalize. And then they start thinking like methodological behaviorists, we kind of break behaviorism into two main camps. Methodological behaviorism, which is that idea that if you cannot observe it, it does not count as behavior. And radical behaviorism, which is it doesn't matter if we can observe it or not, it's still behavior, it still works the same way. And I think a lot of people don't realize that the behaviorism that most of us know and practice, is based on Skinner's radical behaviorism. And that we do indeed consider things that we can't see or that we can't observe. And we assume that they work the same way as everything else. And that there's no reason to think just because we can't see it means it's an entirely different thing. And so that's kind of what underlies the science of behavior analysis. And I think probably most of your listeners are more familiar with that, and with behavior analysis being the idea that behavior is learned, or in some cases not. There's some behavior that we come to the world with, usually respondent behavior, but that behavior is influenced by the environment, and that we look at the A's, the B's, and the C's, the antecedents, the behaviors, and the consequences. And that's behavior analysis.
Yeah, I would not have said that.
I'm curious what you would have said if I asked you to define it.
So my understanding of it, which is very different than that, and that's why I said I would have immediately gone, and I've never tried to define radical behaviorism. So I'm loving this, because now I'm going to be smarter after this recording today, and you listener hopefully as well. I had this idea that a component of it was that there wasn't, and I hesitate because I don't want to sound stupid, Keira. I'm going to that free will wasn't like something that exists because you're literally just behaving and you're biologically incapable of doing anything other than what your genetics, your learning history, and your current context allow you to do. Even though you is that a component of it?
Sort of. I think it is less of an important component than a lot of people think. And I know Skinner had some thoughts on it, which I will not do him justice if I if I try to recount what Skinner's thoughts were. But I think this is something that a lot of people, as they kind of get into the philosophy of radical behaviorism, start to feel weird about, because we all kind of, I think most of us grow up with that idea of free will, and that like I am in charge of my behavior and I'm choosing to do the things that I'm doing and I'm in charge of my own destiny, so to speak. And behaviorism kind of challenges that, because we have to always look at behavior and go, huh, where did that come from? But we also have the challenge of we never really know. That as behavior analysts, unless I am watching behavior be learned from the very beginning in a lab or in tightly controlled circumstances, I never really know. I can make educated guesses about what's going on and where behavior originated from or how a particular behavior was learned. But we never really know, which is frustrating as a, as a behavior analyst. But yeah, the idea of free will doesn't really play nicely with the idea of behavior being a product of circumstances and of the environment. But I've come to kind of embrace that because it kind of lets you off the hook a little bit. Like when you think about it, if you engage in some behavior that you don't like, which all of us do, it's a lot easier because you're the only one that knows your full history. So you can look at that behavior and go, oh, I can figure out how I learned that or where that came from or what in my environment has reinforced that. And so for me, it's a little, it initially, I kind of was, I think, a little bothered by that idea of, well, does this mean there's no free will? And then the more I thought about it, I was like, oh, I kind of like that because it feels like it lets me off the hook a little bit. Like when I behave in a way that I don't like, that I don't have to be like, yep, I chose that. I behaved like that on purpose. I didn't. My environment selected that behavior for whatever reason. But to me, that's also the beauty of behavior analysis, is that we can also apply that logic to all behavior, that we don't ever blame the learner. And I love, my favorite quote from behavior analysis that came from Fred Keller originally, I think, is the learner is always right, meaning that there is always a reason that a learner is engaging in behavior, even if we don't like that behavior, even if we find that behavior horrifying. And that's kind of back to what we were talking about before. Once you put those glasses on, you can't take them off, right? If you understand that about behavior, that behavior is a product of circumstances and environment, then you have to always give the learner some grace that their behavior is happening for a reason.
I thought you were going to say the rat is never wrong, which is it's the same thing, really.
Yeah, and I mean, right and wrong is kind of arbitrary, right?
Mm.
Like that's just a assignment that we give to behavior, but it's never wrong in the sense of the learner's doing it for a reason. It might not be behavior we like.
Even if you watched a learner in radical behaviorism, when we're thinking through the lens of radical behaviorism, even if you watched a learner in a lab where you can control the variables really well, you still wouldn't really know because the internal behaviors are not observable or measurable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And that's something I wrestled with a lot in my doctoral dissertation, because I studied anxiety in children on the autism spectrum who were nonverbal or had limited verbal behavior. So we were specifically looking at with kids on the autism spectrum. There's a very high comorbidity rate with autism and anxiety disorders. But it is very difficult to know if someone has an anxiety disorder when they have autism, because if you look in the DSM, most of the diagnostic criteria for anxiety disorders rely on verbal report. And so that's how we often get to an anxiety diagnosis, because the person can verbalize how they're feeling. And in kids with autism that get an anxiety diagnosis, it often comes from parent report, which, as we know, is not very reliable. So we were looking at, how do we know if somebody who cannot tell us how they're feeling, how do we know if they have anxiety? And what even does that mean? And that is an incredibly important question, because it also dictates treatment. That if I am working with a child on the autism spectrum who cannot tell me how they're feeling, but I think that they have anxiety, first of all, what does that mean? Second of all, how do we measure it? Because third, and perhaps most importantly, is if we're going to treat it, we need to have a way of measuring whether or not treatment's working. And if the way we're measuring anxiety is just asking someone else, how do you think they feel? That's not a very good way to measure, especially when that person knows whether or not their child is getting treatment. So there had been, and there still is, a lot of misunderstanding about anxiety and what that is and what that means and how to measure it and how to treat it. Because when we don't know how to measure it, then of course we're not going to know if our treatments are working.
Would that be similar to diagnosing a dog or other species with anxiety?
Yeah, it's been interesting that my work with dogs has ended up moving in that direction too. Funny enough, I said to myself when I started getting into dog training, I want to do puppies and service dogs. I don't want to deal with behavior problems. I've been doing that my whole career. And here we are. I currently am working with one puppy, and all the rest are all dogs with very severe behavior problems. And I can't say I'm surprised that's where I landed, but it makes sense given my experience, and that ends up being what I understand the best and what I know how to treat the best. But yeah, it's the same. So anxiety, I think a lot of behavior analysts shy away from, because it's an emotion. And again, we've got a lot of people that have this kind of misconception that behaviorism only touches things that we can observe, which anxiety often is not one of those things. But again, going back to the radical behaviorism idea, Skinner was very explicit in saying emotions are not anything special, and we should not treat them as such, because anything that happens inside the skin, we should assume is the same as things that happen outside the skin. So if there is behavior that I'm experiencing or I'm engaging in that only I can observe, it's still the same as behavior that you and I can observe. So anxiety is one of those things. Skinner actually has this really awesome paper. It's Estes and Skinner. I want to say it's 1941, but I might have the year wrong. I'll find it and I'll send it to you so that you can link your listeners to it, because it is a really great paper. Skinner attempted to study anxiety with rats way back when he was still doing work in a lab, and trying to figure out how do we actually operationalize anxiety. And he was, I think, in the paper, if anybody's read any Skinner, it can be a little bit dense and difficult to read, and he's not always getting right to the point and giving us nice, neat, easy to understand definitions. But basically what Skinner was getting at in that paper is anxiety is behavior, and it is behavior that is caused by a specific set of conditions. And those conditions are when an aversive event is signaled. So the aversive event hasn't happened yet, but it is about to happen, and we know it's about to happen because there's something in our environment right now that is telling us it's going to happen. So in his study, they had I know I'm going to get the details of this wrong because I haven't read this paper in probably 10 years. They had rats in an operant chamber, a Skinner box, and they had some sort of signal. I think it was a sound that played, a tone that played. And these Skinner boxes, the little grates on the bottom of them could be electrified. So they could deliver shock to the feet of the rats. And so what they would do is they would play a very long tone. And then at the end of that tone, the rats would get a shock through the levers of or through the bars on the bottom of the Skinner box. Now, these rats were all trained to press the lever in that Skinner box on, I can't remember what the schedule of reinforcement was, but they were pressing very steadily and very regularly, and they were getting food for pressing that lever. And so they were measuring that as sort of a baseline of ongoing behavior. So the rats are steadily pressing, eating their little rat pellets. And then they'd start pairing long tone, shock follows. The first couple of times they played that tone, the rat's behavior did not change. They'd just keep doing their thing and keep pressing, and they're ignoring the tone. They'd get shocked and they'd kind of jump, startle for a second, they'd stop pressing the lever for a second, and then they'd recover pretty quickly. After just a couple of those pairings, when they would play that long tone, all of a sudden the rat would stop. They'd stop pressing that lever. Even though the tone has nothing to do with the lever, the tone doesn't change the schedule of reinforcement. Food is still available. The rat could go right on pressing and keep getting food during that time. But all of those rats would stop responding during that tone. They'd get the shock and then they'd go right back to responding. And they'd often go back to responding even faster, almost like they were trying to make up for that lost time. And so Skinner was conceptualizing that change in behavior, that time when the rat pauses and goes, oh, crap, it's coming. That he was saying that's anxiety. We can operationalize anxiety, we can measure it. And all it is a change in behavior when there's an upcoming aversive event signaled. So that's how I kind of got into figuring out, okay, we can look at it the same way in kids with autism who cannot tell us how they're feeling. We can assume anxiety is any change in behavior when there is something aversive upcoming that's being signaled in their environment. And so we ended up running a study that was set up kind of similarly to what Skinner did. I know that people are going to be like, oh my God, that sounds horrifying. I promise it wasn't. We went through extensive ethics reviews. But basically what we would do is we would find some things that our participants found aversive in their everyday life that were reportedly anxiety provoking. So we would survey caregivers and say, okay, you've told us such and such kid has a lot of anxiety. What things provoke that anxiety? What things stress them out or make them nervous? And for most of these kids, it was regular everyday things like noise, going to the doctor or the nurse. For one of our participants, it was restricted access to condiments during lunch. Like he had this thing where he would want to just put tons of ketchup and mustard on everything that he ate, and he wasn't allowed to do that. But then that led to all kinds of challenging behavior leading up to lunchtime because he was so stressed out about how much ketchup and mustard am I going to get at lunch today. And basically what we did is we set up a similar situation. So we would bring these kids into our lab, which was just a small room they'd never been in. We'd play with them for a little while. We'd bring all their favorite toys. We'd bring their favorite snacks. We'd make it a good time. And then we would measure ongoing behavior. So we'd look at what are they doing when they're just like hanging out in the room. When there's nothing going on, there's nothing aversive signaled. Are they moving around? Are they engaging in stereotypic behavior like hand flapping? Are they talking? Are they making noise? Are they crying? Are they whining? And then we would have a 5-minute baseline period where me or whoever the experimenter was would just sit in the room and hang out with the kid. And then we would have a 1-minute signal period where we would have a computer that would turn on and it would show a picture of the thing that we thought provoked anxiety for them. So, like for the kid with the condiment issue, it would be a picture of ketchup and mustard with a big no symbol over them. And we would direct the kids to the screen and say, hey, in 1 minute, this thing is going to happen. So in his case, we'd say, in 1 minute, you're going to have a snack, but you cannot have any condiments. For another kid, it was noise. We'd say, in 1 minute, I'm going to play a loud noise. And we'd wait 1 minute and we'd measure behavior during that 1-minute signal. When the signal was up, the computer would turn off, and then we would expose them to that trigger or that thing that we thought caused anxiety for 1 minute. So, like for our condiment guy, we'd give him a bagel. We'd have a box of condiments that was locked up so he could like see the condiments in them. We'd be like, oh no, we can't get this open. You're going to have a plain bagel. For the kid with loud noise, we'd play like a car alarm sound. All the things that we did were I know when I talk about this, it sounds like, man, that was kind of mean to do. But we'd expose them to the thing for 1 minute. We'd measure behavior during that minute. And then we'd go to another baseline where we would just hang out again. And then we'd end the session again with all their favorite things. We'd bring in their favorite snacks, favorite toys. We'd have a great time. And we'd run a couple of sessions like that with each kid. And so what we're looking for there is there a change in behavior? We're looking at baseline rates of behavior. We're looking at behavior during the signal, that time when we're saying, hey, this thing's going to happen. We're looking at behavior during the actual event. And then we're looking at how they recover afterwards. So we have another baseline period. And in that way, we're saying, okay, anxiety is that change in behavior that we see during the signal. So now we can define it. And for most kids, anxiety looked like multiple different things. It wasn't just one behavior. It was usually a cluster of different behaviors. And we did try to measure physiological responses as well, but this was back in we started that work back in 2010. So we didn't really have great technology like we do now. If I was doing it now with all the smart watches and rings and things like that, we could have gotten a lot better measures. But we're measuring mostly outward signs of things that we can see. And so it's the same with dogs. It's the same with animals. We can look at what are the things that their caregivers are reporting are causing stress or causing anxiety. And then we can look at what are things in their environment that are signaling that that thing is about to happen. So, for example, my dog came with some very bad dog reactivity. One of the things that was a trigger for her was hearing jingling collars or jingling tags or jingling anything, because the sound of jingling tags predicts a dog is about to come. And so then we can set up a similar paradigm to actually measure anxiety and look at what kinds of behavior is she engaging in that would indicate to us that this is about to be a problem. And then how can we change that behavior? And so in our study with the kids on the autism spectrum, what we did after that assessment period was we moved into treatment where we would do exactly what we do in dog training, basically systematic desensitization, where we go, okay, in 1 minute, I'm going to play a loud noise. But when we started our treatment, that loud noise initially was very, very quiet. We'd play it at the level that they could handle it and that they weren't having challenging behavior. And we would teach them alternative behavior to engage in. So for our students, we taught them things like squeezing a stress ball and taking deep breaths and putting their shoulders down and sitting back in their chair. So we pick other behavior to teach them. We practice it where we're dialing down the aversive stimulus first, and we get them really good at engaging in other behavior, and then we slowly turn up the dial on the scary thing or the anxiety provoking thing. And so that's all translated really well to the work that I'm doing now. It's the same basic model for any problem that's anxiety based or fear based. We teach a different behavior, and then we slowly turn up the dial on the scary thing.
Well, I have so many questions, but looking at the time, we should head towards wrapping this up. But if you're enjoying this, the listener, we're going to keep geeking out with Keira on the science in part 2 of our conversation, which will be the episode that follows this, and how we'll also talk about how you, the listener, can ground or build upon what you're doing to even better ground your work in the science. So we will be continuing in part 2. For now, though, I want to share gratitude to Keira for sharing. I was hoping to talk about anxiety, and we naturally got there without me prompting it. So that was enjoyable and informative. So thank you very much for sharing everything about your story and ending up with radical behaviorism and talking about anxiety. That was amazing. Just before we do officially wrap up, though, could you just share with everyone listening where they can go to find you on the interwebs, find out more about you, what you're doing, get in touch?
Yeah, so my dog training business is called Pet Project Dog Training, and I haven't got around to making a real legitimate website, so I am using a link tree as my website still. But if you Google Pet Project Dog Training, that should be the first thing that pops up, and you can find me on Instagram at Pet Project Dog Training. That's one of my big things right now is I'm working on just building my presence on Instagram and social media. And you can find me on YouTube as well. All of my different accounts are all linked to each other. So if you find one, you can find them all. And we didn't talk about sleep at all, but my sleep consulting is Moore Behavior Consulting, Moore, like my last name, Behavior Consulting. And on that actually has a website, morebehaviorconsulting.com. And on that, you can find links to all of the work that I've done on anxiety, all the work I've done on sleep. There's a whole bunch of podcast episodes that I've recorded on those two things with people in the human behavior analysis community. And so if people are interested in those topics, that's a great place to start.
Amazing. And we will, of course, link to all of that in the show notes. And I don't think anyone's ever come on the podcast, Keira, and said, well, I have a website, it's perfect, nothing needs doing on it. It's absolutely great. And we had the reason I bring that up is we had a member in our community just this week who's just getting started and posted a question about what to put on their Instagram in their first post. And the phrase, and I don't know who said this, perfection is the enemy of good enough and good enough gets results. So I'm celebrating your Linktree account, and we will link to that and everything else you have mentioned. So Keira, this has been so much fun. So from myself and on behalf of everyone listening, we really appreciate you taking the time to come and hang out with us, and looking forward to part 2.
All right.
And thank you so much for listening as well. This is your host, Ryan Cartledge, signing off from this episode of the Animal Training Academy podcast show. We hope today's conversation inspired you and equipped you with new tools for your trainer's toolbox. Remember, every challenge in training is an opportunity to learn and sharpen your animal training geekery. Embrace the rough patches, learn from them, and keep improving. And don't forget, the path to growing your skills and expanding your knowledge continues beyond this episode. Visit www.atamember.com to join our supportive membership, where you will find a community of trainers just like you. Together, we're making a huge positive difference in the lives of animal and human learners worldwide. Until next time, keep honing your skills, stay awesome, and remember, every interaction with an animal or human learner is your opportunity to create ripples. We're here, cheering you on every step of the way. See you at the next episode.